I discovered this project called One of the Many Mats, which was this guy who had a chip in his hand and was using it to dispense NFTs. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever because I was like, wow, like this is combining the technology that I've been fascinated with crypto.
Hello. Welcome to the Women Who Roar podcast. It's female leaders talking about crushing work, money, and life. Hi, I'm Shreya Chaubey.
I'm Sarah Walter.
Unfortunately, Jess isn't able to join us today, but we're very excited to introduce you to our guest for the show today, Parker Jay-Pachirat. Parker is head of community at FinTech Collective and a member of the firm's DeFi team. Prior to joining FinTech Collective, Parker was chief of staff at FinTech Today, which was acquired by Workweek, where she launched the company's first spin-off arm solely dedicated to crypto. She was a lead writer, host, and producer for Crypto Tonight. Parker started her career in product management, later working as an intern for Unovis Asset Management and Impulsum VC. Parker is also a founding member of Boys Club, a social club and DAO helping women break into crypto, which was featured on Bankless and was a top 10 finalist and participant in Seed Club Accelerator cohort. Welcome, Parker.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Parker, tell us what landed you in the wonderful world of crypto.
Yeah, really interesting journey and honestly pretty unexpected. Growing up, I wasn't in a family or household that was really into entrepreneurship or technology or finance at all. And same for the school that I went to. I actually studied a major that's pretty unconventional called critical theory, which at its heart is the study of systems of power in our society. Actually, most of my peers in that major were very anti-technology, I would say is the sentiment. But I began to just go down this rabbit hole, learning more about AI, brain-machine interfaces, and really started seeing a lot of parallels between technology and systems of power. And am of the belief that technology can be leveraged to create better, more equitable systems in our society. I actually knew about crypto and Bitcoin, that it existed for a while, but only really had a light bulb moment when I started looking into the underlying technology, so blockchain, and started really realizing the potential that blockchain has to transform so many different systems in our society, supply chains, finance, obviously, data sharing, and that was really what drew me into the crypto ecosystem.
That's fantastic. You know, it's interesting. I think a recent research study basically mentioned something like 87% of Americans have heard of cryptocurrencies. And in fact, something like 17 or 20% have actually also invested in cryptocurrency. But the overall understanding of the underlying technology in blockchain seems to be the sort of subject matter that's really reserved for the experts, right? Because it's not a speculative asset or an asset class that people want to take a view on and play around with. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that you mentioned it was actually the technology piece that piqued your interest, which is very unique.
Yeah.
So Parker, you talked about being interested in the technology behind crypto. I think from at least my vantage point, it's seemingly like a very high bar to understand that and somewhat inaccessible for sort of the everyday person. Was there any part of that, I guess, journey, so to speak, I feel like we're on The Bachelor, that was intimidating for you? And like what made you sort of like feel comfortable just like diving right in?
Certainly. I mean, it was very intimidating. I'm a non-technical person. That was already sort of a insecurity that I had back when I was doing product management. But what really helped me was a combination of different things. So number one, just doing a lot of reading, but really mixing that reading in with other forms of learning. So watching YouTube videos, talking to friends that I had in the space, listening to podcasts, really trying to crystallize these different concepts by accessing these different mediums of sort of education. And then also really immersing myself in the communities that that these people in this world are in. So as funny as it might sound, like just following a bunch of people on Twitter, reading what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, what they're writing about, and then looking into that was a really good starting point for me.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. The curiosity element really strikes because,
Yeah.
If you were to categorize a characteristic of the crypto community, inherently they're curious people because there are so many different concepts and jargon and the minutiae that you really have to understand is quite detailed in many of these concepts.
There's very few things now where it's so commonplace to be like, I've gone down the rabbit hole, right? Like, I think that that term encompasses like everything about kind of crypto.
Right.
Totally.
But Sarah, something you were saying, really resonated with me is the intimidation that this can also present. So maybe Parker, tell us a little bit about, were there times in your journey of onboarding into the crypto world that were kind of dark and, did you ever feel like giving up?
Dark is a loaded word. There were definitely a lot of points where I felt
Intentional,
very,
of course.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of points where I felt very discouraged, or just like, it's so tedious. I literally built basically a system of notes on different subjects for myself to refer back to, including like definitions, flashcards, examples of different terms in crypto and how they're used. And I still refer back to those notes this day because it's like constant learning, constant just touching up on the basics. One thing I'll say though is that like you mentioned before, there's, all of these different terms in crypto. I think one really exciting and special aspect of the industry is just how many different access points exist, right? Like within crypto, there's NFTs, which is interesting for people that are interested in art, music. There's DeFi, there's DAOs. So there's just a whole spectrum of different niches within crypto that you could really dive into.
Yeah.
So Parker, in that statement, you just mentioned a few different terms, all acronyms of things. So NFTs, DAOs. For our listeners out there, can you put a little context around them and potentially kind of define what they are and why they're important to the whole crypto and DeFi ecosystem?
Yeah, 100%. NFT stands for non-fungible token. It's essentially a piece of data that lives on a blockchain, which is a record of transactions. And that record of transactions could be financial transactions, transactions of data sharing. It could be transactions of physical goods. One of the primary characteristics of a blockchain is that it's immutable, meaning that no one can go back into that record and change it. So once a transaction has gone through, it's there forever. It's also transparent. The blockchain and the transactions on it are viewable by anyone in the world with an internet connection. But yeah, an NFT is a token stored on the blockchain that is non-transferable in the sense that whereas like with $1, I could trade it for $1, an NFT, you can't trade it for something else. So it's like one piece of data that's original and it could represent many different things. A DAO is also an acronym, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which can be quite a lot of words to think about. But in the simplest of terms, you could think about a DAO as a group chat or community or club with a shared bank account. So like it says in the name, a DAO is usually decentralized, meaning that instead of having these top-down structures and systems of power, DAOs utilize different forms of governance. One example that is pretty common is having basically members of a DAO, when they contribute more, they get more voting power in return, rather than entering a role and automatically having a set amount of power. So DAOs really revolve around a lot of voting, governance. Also, a lot of that governance has to do with this shared treasury or shared bank account and voting on how that's allocated. But most of the systems within a DAO are pretty democratic. I'd say like as DAOs have evolved and grown, there's a lot of different strategies for governance. But in creating a DAO, it's sort of like creating a microeconomy, like a micro-political system, a microculture. So lots of different puzzle pieces.
For our listeners, maybe what will be helpful is just to frame an example. So one of the more noted examples was, for instance, the Constitution DAO, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk
or
a
the
little
golf
bit?
course DAO?
Yeah, or the golf, whichever one you want to pick. Do you want to, maybe use an example that you found interesting, and how the functioning of that mechanism kind of really brought out that use case?
Sure. I know the golf course DAO, Links DAO, and I know the Constitution DAO. I don't know like the intricacies of how either of those are operating because I'm not in them. But I can tell you a little about another DAO that I'm in called Mochi. It's actually sort of a multiplayer game. Basically, you enter and you are paired in a group. You all pool some ETH, so like Ether, Ethereum currency, and you each set a goal. And then what happens from there is now all of your funds are pooled, and you check in with each other daily about the goal that you each individually set out for each other.
So can I just interrupt you for one sec, just to like get a little bit into the mechanics of this, but not too deep. So you start with you all pool funds. Mm-hmm. What stops, X person from then taking all of those funds and running off?
Yeah. So all DAOs utilize what we call a treasury. There's different treasury tools. You could just think of it as sort of a vault where these funds live, and you can also have multiple treasuries within a DAO. One component of this that would be really helpful to understand is multi-sig, which means multi-signature. So DAOs, what they really utilize is something called a smart contract. A smart contract is essentially just a few lines of code that executes on almost if-then functions. So if this, then the smart contract will perform this action. And smart contracts are built on top of Ethereum, which is what's unique about that blockchain. But a multi-sig enables access to this treasury and the funds within it using a smart contract. So if you and I were multi-sig holders or signers on the treasury, we would have access to control that. And usually within a DAO, there's a designated treasury team or treasury person that's voted in.
Okay, so Parker, you just talked about one DAO that you're in, but you also started a DAO, or the founding team of a DAO called Boys Club. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think Boys Club has a pretty interesting story of how it got started, actually. So the two co-founders, Dina and Natasha, were like, let's have some friends over, let's have some girlfriends over on our roof and just drink some natural wine, teach them about crypto. They ended up posting about this on Twitter, and it really snowballed there. So they were like, what if we did a beta test of having a small dinner with like 12 women, posted tickets online, those sold out in like an hour, posted like, I think 60 or 70 more, those sold out in a day. And they were like, wow, there's really demand for this. I found the Twitter account and the Twitter post they created like a few days after they made it. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I'm pretty deep in my crypto journey. I actually don't know any women in crypto, don't have any like female friends in crypto. And that was never really something that I had a problem with or like felt like was an issue. But learning that there was going to be this gathering of women in New York City that are interested in crypto, I was like, this is so cool. So the dinner was a success. It was basically just wine, chatting, answering questions. One thing that we do during these community events is have a few panelists come on, and then women can text in their questions if they don't want to ask them in person, and the panelists will answer their questions. So after really like getting that validation that this works, Dina and Natasha were sort of thinking about what's next, and we sort of started having these ongoing conversations about what Boys Club might be, about what we could do with merch, all these fun ideas. But yeah.
Yeah, and what's the mission statement if there is one?
Yeah, so it's currently evolving. Actually, we started with a mission to onboard the next 1 million women and non-binary individuals into crypto. we're still doing that in 3 primary ways. Number 1 is our in real life events. So our community events, our dinner series. We just started doing a monthly event at the Freehold in Williamsburg, where we're inviting panelists in. It's called DTR, so like Define the Relationship. And we're talking about crypto's relationship to different things. So we just had crypto and climate. And then the second component of how we're onboarding women to crypto and reducing those barriers to entry is through crypto literacy. We're taking a really playful and energized approach to educational content. So we produce videos about, for example, the Kardashian clan, if it were blockchain, Reformation pieces as tokens. Really making it fun. And then the third component of that is our just our community. But we're expanding now more from just to focus on onboarding because what we've realized is like I said before, like there's so many amazing women in our community and not all of them are new. Actually, one of the most special components I think about our community is how many new people there are and then how many definitely more advanced crypto native members we have that are helping those people and also working on projects of their own together. So we're onboarding, but we're also just creating a welcome space for women who believe in our mission and want to get involved.
There was one term you used there, crypto native. What does that mean?
Loaded question. Probably means different things to different people. Some people would probably measure that by time, like got in early, 2012, 2013, 2014. Other people would probably label that as just very crypto literate. So just deep in, understands terms, understands a specific sector. One thing I'll say on like sort of touching back on what we were speaking about before with access points is I think it can be really intimidating when you're first getting into this space and you're overwhelmed with a plethora of information about different things. I would say don't try to learn everything. You can't. Like even me now, there are like certain things in crypto that I just don't understand or maybe I'm not really interested in. But wherever you find those interests, like dive deep. So like for me, that's DAOs, that's like layer 2 scaling solutions, this specific type of scaling solution called a roll-up, which we don't have to get into that. But wherever you find interest or whatever resonates with you, just get really deep into that. And don't worry so much about trying to understand every single thing, because the deeper you get into one subject, the more you'll realize how those terms and ideas and concepts translate to other parts of crypto, which make them in turn easier to understand.
Why the need to be a DAO?
I love when people ask this. So, yeah, what I see as the strengths of Boys Club can only be amplified by a DAO structure. I'm actually very much of the firm belief that not everything needs to or should be a DAO.
Right.
And I feel like everything's turning into a DAO and it doesn't need to be. But for us, we want to be super community driven. And what that means is really owning our resources and assets together, sharing mutual upside, enabling like the maximum level of ownership and participation. So we're still in the very early stages of transitioning to a DAO, but for example, we have 7 working guilds or like working groups focused on different initiatives within Boys Club. So onboarding, social media, partnerships, outreach. And one example of one that was proposed by a community member is a product studio. So one of our community members who's really active, we have an open proposal form for anyone. And she came to us and was like, I want to create a product studio within Boys Club where community members can submit their ideas, the guild votes on them, and then the ones accepted go through this 8-week incubator cycle where they do user testing, user research, workshopping, consulting. So there's a lot of organic community-driven projects coming out of Boys Club, and the DAO structure really helps enable that.
Do you have to be female to be in Boys Club?
No, we don't. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good segue into talking about community in crypto. Because you are head of community at FinTech Collective, and we're very lucky to have you. But please talk a little bit about why community is so important in this asset class.
It's what drives this asset class, right? Like the belief in crypto, the belief in Bitcoin, the belief in Ethereum is what drives its value. Same with actually just like paper fiat money, because if no one believed in it, it wouldn't work. But I think it goes deeper into even more granular level when you consider all of these different ecosystems within crypto. Like I was mentioning before, NFTs, DeFi, DAOs. I think what we're seeing is all these different communities and groups utilizing crypto and blockchain in different ways to enable new kinds of participation and creation than what was possible before in their industries. Like with NFTs, we've seen NFTs enable full value capture for artists and creators, and the removal of intermediaries like gallery agents that really enable artists to connect with their community and also to fully get the value of their work back to them.
Okay, so going into NFTs a little bit here, because I think this is definitely a hot topic. So you kind of sometimes read about like the astronomical price that some of these NFTs are selling for. A recent example, and then all of a sudden being worth like a fraction of that. So good example is Jack Dorsey's like initial tweet, which sold for a couple $1 million initially and was being listed for many multiples of that, but I think is currently, there's a bid for like $200. So like pennies on the dollar of what this was purchased for. So I think it's at least my impression, and this is part of my fear of like getting really involved in this whole area, is that you hear about like rug pulls and like scams and this being just like a massive like hype cycle basically, and what is the actual fundamental value of these things. So can you, I think, just explain a little bit about like, if you're approaching this, how would you think about value? How would you think about participating in this market when it seems like there's just a huge educational component to it, but there's also, it's very subjective, at least on paper?
Totally. I think with NFTs, there's a few different things I could say. I'll just start by saying I'm not a collector, and I also don't flip NFTs, which is like selling them and trying to profit off of them. I think you're right. I think there is a lot of mimesis happening with NFT hype cycles, and I would actually agree with you that NFTs overarchingly are really driven by hype cycles. Similarly to fashion trends or technology trends.
Art. Market.
Yeah. When something becomes cool and people start really recognizing it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like all signaling all the way down.
Right.
And one really interesting conversation that's become more prevalent in this space recently is about utility.
Right.
So, does this NFT have utility? Well, how are we defining utility, right? Like some NFTs give access to DAOs, some NFTs, go back to charities. It depends what you define as utility. I guess I could answer this question like on a more personal note. I definitely have like a few NFTs, and my favorite ones are actually ones that I didn't just buy out of like FOMO. My favorite NFT is called Bagel Mat. It's one of the many mats collection. When I first got interested in technology, just generally, I was super interested, still am, in brain-machine interfaces. So something like Neuralink, which is basically taking a chip and putting it in your brain. We've actually been using this technology for years already medically, but what companies like Neuralink are proposing is using this technology in a more recreational way. So enabling people to remove interfaces between themselves and their other technologies. I discovered this project called One of the Many Mats, which was this guy who had a chip in his hand and was using it to dispense NFTs. And I was like,
for real. Actually.
For real.
I don't know if to be like, this is really cool or slightly terrified.
I thought it was like the coolest thing ever because I was like, wow, like this is combining the technology that I've been fascinated with crypto.
Wait, he had a chip in his hand. And what was he using the chip for?
So basically, like, you know how you can do tap to pay?
Okay.
It's like
here's an NFT.
Here's an NFT.
Yeah.
Wow, like a wand, like an NFT wand.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow.
And it was the first project, it is the first project of its kind in the space because it makes NFTs even more rare in the way that you can only get them if you see Matt and you do the mechanism to get it in person.
So did you like meet Matt on a street corner
Oh
somewhere?
yeah, oh yeah.
Did Matt actually have is he actually called Matt?
Yeah, his
Okay,
name
so-
is Matt. Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't like an anonymous
No.
crypto personality. We should talk about that too, by the
Yeah,
way.
we can definitely talk about that. Yeah, so we met, we were talking. It was really interesting because I was coming into the conversation with all of these questions around like, how do you think that this is going to change, like how we view humans? What like regulatory or legal things do you think will be around this? Like, for example, you have your chip. Do you think in like 10 years it'll be like you have to be over a certain age to get a tattoo? Will it be like that, right? Or like, what are the like?
Can your chip get hacked?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that was also one thing that we talked about. But he totally came with this different perspective of like art, and I thought that was interesting. But like that's an NFT to me. I think I can't see myself purchasing or like being gifted an NFT that is my favorite over that one, just because that one's so unique and cool. So I didn't really directly answer your question of like measuring utility.
no, you
but
did. It's utility, but utility is subjective sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Parker, one of the things that fascinates me about the crypto world is the ability for people to be pseudonymous, right? And there are definitely very valid reasons why people remain basically anonymous under pseudonyms. But could you talk a little bit about what type of an ecosystem that creates? And if you've ever had any unique experiences with that particular aspect of crypto?
Yeah. So I'm not anon. Or
So
maybe
it's actually
I am.
called
Being anon.
Anon.
Yeah,
You're
being
anon.
anon.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've at FinTech Collective have hired our first anon
Yeah.
employee.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's
I'm not anon, but there are a variety of reasons that I've seen people be anon that really span across a range. One of the, I think, most compelling arguments for being anon, and the reason that I might be interested in myself, is you're really just judged for what you're putting out there. Like literally your content, your thoughts, your writing. There's nothing else that anyone can judge you on, which it can be good and bad. I've actually heard of a few women in the space being anon, so like no one knows they're a woman, so no one knows they're a woman. And then I've heard of people just being anon because it's fun for them and it's what they like to do. But yeah, so funny story. So to really like, I guess, rewind, I have a few favorite anons on Twitter. One is called Adam Newman's Chief of Staff. And,
Wow.
yeah. And they're super funny, like the best posts, just love their content. Have been following them for like a year or two now and always like tweeting at them. They tweet back and I'm just like, cool. Last year I was in Miami for Bitcoin Miami and went to this actually happy hour that FinTech Today was hosting. And, was chatting around to people, met this really cool person and just had a great conversation with them and was like, wow, like we really vibe. And my phone was dead, but I took their phone and I was like, like follow me on Twitter. I'll follow you back when I charge my phone. Follow me on Twitter, whatever, like go about the rest of like my evening, didn't think about it. Next morning, check my Twitter and it's like, Adam Newman's Chief of Staff followed you back. And I was like, no way. Like,
Oh my God, you met-
Would you have had a fangirl moment if you knew at the time?
I totally would have. And I even like texted him and I was like, I can't believe it's you. Like, oh my God.
What was the chance of that happening?
I know.
Next to nothing.
Yeah.
Wow. It was meant to be.
Truly meant to be. Truly meant to be.
So asking another question on top of that. So it seems like it's somewhat acceptable to be anon in this world, right? And I think putting like our sort of VC investor hat on until crypto and DeFi, frankly, like we never in a bazillion years would have invested in a company where the founder was like not known to us, right?
Yeah.
So like what's changed where like maybe people's level of comfort of doing this, at least from a investment perspective, is sort of more acceptable?
That's a great question. I think there are a lot of cultural norms in crypto generally that are really different than just traditional other industries. It's a lot more casual. It's a lot more relaxed. I noticed when I was first breaking into the space and, chatting with people, networking with people, it was so much less formal and just very welcoming. I don't exactly have an answer to your question, but one thing I will say is this is a huge debate right now.
Right.
And I actually think if we have gotten to a point where investors are more comfortable investing in anons, I think we're actually starting to go back because of just recent events, like especially in DeFi, with these anon founders actually turning out to be actors with kind of bad backgrounds.
Taking the money and running.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that's always true.
Right.
But I do think it is a point of caution. And I would say I'm not too deep in this debate myself, but there's definitely two sides of like one side of a view of if a team is anon, it's like immediate red flag, bad sign, like there's definitely something weird going on there.
Yep.
And then another that's more open. But I think it really depends. I think there's also questions like, is the team revealing their identity to their investors
Right.
versus like the general public or not?
Right.
So lots of nuances there.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is interesting that at a philosophical level, it's that part of society that's making a statement on basically being judged on certain vectors, right? Whether it's your voice, whether it's the color of your skin, whether it's your gender, and technology is really saying there's a way to get around that, right? We can hide your voice, or you can be anon and purely be judged on the quality of your work and the quality of your ideas, which
But
is
you still need a way to have the trust.
right. And
Like-
that's exactly right. We haven't solved every part of that
Right.
problem, but we are starting to get to a point where there is a solution. But it's also kind of sad that the real world kind of doesn't really, look at people from the perspective of an unbiased eye.
And I don't think you have to, right? Like I think there's reasons to not. But I will say I think there are ways to build trust and still be anon. Like I was talking to an anon recently, Frog Monkey, who
I just can't. That's
really,
funny.
really, yeah, funny.
Frog Monkey.
Frog Monkey
Okay.
with 2 E's.
Two E's.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go
So
home
I'm
and like
sorry.
set up an anon account.
I know.
But they're really respect in the DAO space, have a lot of knowledge, have a lot of experience, and was working on Bankless DAO for a while. And a few weeks ago, I reached a point because I'm pioneering the transition of boys clubs transition from a community to a DAO. And I was kind of running into all these roadblocks and just frustrations, and talking to actually the producer of the Bankless podcast, Luke, who's amazing. And he was like, you should talk to Frog Monkey, like and like talk to them about like these like kind of like blockers that you're experiencing. Like I know that they've experienced similar things. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like, and then he like intros me to Frog Monkey on Twitter, and I was like, I don't know if they're gonna respond because like they're so famous. They do respond. We set up like a time to chat, and I come on at like on camera, and they didn't. And I was like, okay, cool. But we still talked, but
Yeah.
they're still under their anon identity, right? Like I don't know what they look like. I know what their voice sounds like, but I don't know who they are.
Well, it could be a fake voice.
Could be a fake. A lot of people do that actually. So there are a lot of anons that actually in Seed Club, which is kind of like an accelerator for tokenized communities and DAOs that Boys Club was in, there was an anon in there. And what they do is like they have face filters. So they'll put like an avatar over their face. And some even go as far to do like voice changing as well.
So on that, you mentioned when you got connected, right? At first it was over Twitter, and then you zoomed or however. So I'm gonna date myself from my generational perspective a little bit here, but all the various forms of communication, especially those that are common in the crypto and DeFi world, it's a lot. So I guess how do you communicate, right? If you're chatting with people, like what are kind of common forms of communication? Like what do you use?
Yeah, I'd say there's 3 main platforms. So there's Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. within Boys Club, we use Discord both for like our community chat and for our core team and internal chat.
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit on that concept around interest and affinity areas, right? People have lots of varied interests. And do you find that the crypto community, which is obviously massive at this point and has a lot of diversity in all the aspects that we've spoken about, but as a holistic community, do you find that there are common characteristics or archetypes or philosophical points of view that the community as a whole represents?
Yeah. I would say there's a large spectrum, but it's like, actually, I've been like teaching my dad about crypto, and he was apparently trying to explain to his friend what a DAO was. And he was like, yeah, DAOs are full of like libertarians and anarchists, which I think it's a pretty good explanation. Like, I think it's people who are rejecting current systems, or at least like deeply questioning them, specifically revolving around systems of power and transparency, and also governance. So how decisions are made, what process that is.
And this brings us to our final segment, Ask the Experts. There's a lot of career and financial advice out there, but we want to engage in the conversation with women as women. This question comes from Twitter user @exomit, and her question is, I'm trying to get into crypto, but there's so much information out there that it's really overwhelming. I don't feel like any resources are geared towards beginners. How do I dip my toes into crypto? Where should I start?
The best way to start is just by learning the basics. So start reading about blockchain, any concepts that are kind of broader that you're interested in, like NFTs, DAOs. Really explore and see.
And
what
does that
piques your
start with
interest.
like Google blockchain?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. I would say that's like a good place to start, just by absorbing information, like being a sponge. And then when you find something that's really interesting, just dive deeper into it through your research. And then I would say another really great thing to do is if you know someone who's already deep into this, or you're able to contact someone who you like their perspective, and you want to like learn more about them too, you can really just ask like them to sort of be your mentor. And I think that's how a lot of people break into crypto. We actually have this within Boys Club. It's called Wingman. But we have a bunch of wingmen that are more crypto native, more seasoned in the space, and have offered like their time once a week to do calls with newer members and help onboard them one-on-one.
And cheap plug, the FinTech Collective newsletter weekly has a bunch of great content on crypto as well. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Parker.
So Parker, we usually we end every show the same with one question that we have for all of our guests, and that question is: what person has inspired you to roar the loudest, and why?
Lots of pressure. Definitely my younger sister, Mia. We're super different, like super opposite personalities in a lot of ways. I hope she's okay with this characterization, but I would say I think she would agree, I'm more extroverted, definitely more risk-taking, bold, not so concerned with rule abiding. She's definitely more like introverted, super artistic, super creative. And she's really inspired me because I'm just so impressed by her. Like she really knows herself. She's not afraid to be herself. She's not afraid to really be different. And she's not afraid to just honestly be who she genuinely is, like without any hesitation. And she's also incredible. Like she's so wise. I'm just so impressed. She's 4 years younger than me, but whenever she gives me advice, which she does a lot, so shout out to her, she's just like, no BS, like so on point. And I'm like, you are like wise beyond your years. So she's definitely just taught me a lot about following my intuition, just genuinely like going after what I want, and not being afraid of like what others think.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I think that's the end of it. So Parker,
Yay.
thank you so much for joining us this week. It was like fascinating to have you. I think I could have you sit here and answer like thousands more questions just for me personally. But hope everyone enjoys it, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Parker. And I just have to think of my anon name at this point.
Me too. And my avatar.
Yeah, an avatar.
Thank you guys for having me.
And if you want the experts to answer your questions about finance, careers, and women in leadership, tweet at us at Ask MoneyLion to be featured on the podcast.